First item is a pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sarah, can you read our mission statement?
Thank you. The mission of the Marshall Public School District is to educate, support, and prepare all learners for success.
Thank you. Next item is approval of the agenda.
So moved.
I'll second.
Motion by Sarah Runcie and a second by Jeff to approve the agenda. Any additions or corrections? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. And the agenda is approved. Oh, come on. Next item is our presentation of the budget for 25-26. Welcome, Sarah.
Missed the public forum. I have the public forum next.
Oh, did I skip one?
You skipped the public.
Yeah. you
That's
missed
because my computer froze and then it skipped. Is there anybody from the public want to approach the board? Seeing,
That's you.
okay. Now we'll go to the budget information.
This is like aggressively close. All right, so we have our presentation up here for our preliminary budget for our fiscal year 2026. And what we're going to do is walk through some of the various components of the preliminary budget for 26, and that actually starts July 1st this year and goes through June 30th of 2026. So one thing I do like to compare school budgets to is really putting together a complicated puzzle, like a 1,000-piece puzzle, without having the box to go along with it, with the picture. So that's kind of how we've been feeling this year. There are so many unknowns right now at the state and federal level when it comes to school funding. So we're just doing our best with the information that we do have, and we've come up with this budget to present to you today. So first off, do you want me to advance? We're going to take a look at our student enrollment rates. So you can see that we've had some fluctuations when looking at the blue bar graph year over year. In the next few years, we are really projecting to see some decline in our enrollments year over year, just based on the new students coming in and going through each year. So I will talk a little bit more about our enrollments going forward, but you can see that this year, those targeted amounts or totals for students at 2,465 is where we were at this last month to end the year. And then the projections are based on each of those grades shifting. We obviously add in some projections for students coming into 9th grade from the parochial schools as well. So we are anticipating a reduction. Another thing we take a close look at is our student open enrollment. And it's a pretty big factor that drives our total counts that we're allowed to count through our MARS system, which is our student data system through the state. And we do keep track of these at specific times of the year that the state requires us to enter our enrollment data. And not counting our ALC students, we did have this past year in the smaller chart there, a total of 323 students that came and attended Marshall Public Schools from surrounding districts. So that was nice to see those students coming into our district. However, the larger list on the right, that is a list of Marshall Public School resident students, so students that are in Marshall are attending schools in other districts through open enrollment. And that number for this past year was at 344 students. So that actually creates a negative difference for us. So we have more kids open enrolling out of Marshall Public Schools than we do coming in. And the asterisks in the list of school districts there lists our students that are enrolled through online school. So they're not actually attending those schools in person. They're probably here in their resident homes, attending those other schools online. Another note too, we did recently, I believe it was last year, Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, but we started offering online options to our Marshall resident students. And we had 27 Marshall Public School students enrolled in online option this year, which is good because likely those students that wanted that online option would be enrolling out to a different district that offers online. So we do feel like, we were able to keep those 27 students by offering the online option to them this last year. And then one thing we obviously look at really closely too every year is, with the shifting of class sizes, is our staffing per grade and how many sections we need per grade to maintain the class sizes that the board has set as their recommendations each year. And in preschool, the goal is to have no more than 20 students in each classroom, with 18 being the ideal number of students to be in preschool. We really haven't had issues with going over that. We do, if needed, have to limit the number of students we're taking in for preschool. And at the elementary level, there wasn't major changes to the number of students per classes that we adjusted from the prior year. First grade, though, we did reduce from 9 sections to 8 sections, but you can see that we are still maintaining the goal of having about 20 students in each section. And then for the middle school, just with some shifting in enrollment from grade to grade, we did add a section to 6th grade, and we reduced a section in 7th grade. So it was just kind of a swap based on student counts. And next we'll take a look at some legislative updates, or the little that we do know at this point from that perspective. But next here you can see, I know I've shared this comparison chart with you. You're getting familiar with this at least. This I present at our Truth and Taxation meeting in December. And I just really like it because it's a really good representation of the gap that there is with the general education formula allowance per adjusted pupil unit, which is that orange dashed line, which in 2025 was set at $7,281 per APU. And then when you compare that to that inflation formula, it adds inflation along the blue line to where it should be if it was actually following the inflation rate. So that gap still continues to increase. We actually have received the funding formula allowance for 2026 from the state. We received that notification about a month ago, and they are increasing that allowance by 2.74%, which equates to $200 per APU. The minimum for that has been set by legislation at 2%, with a maximum of up to 3%, and that, I believe, has not changed going into the next future legislative session once that's finalized. I do want to mention, though, too, that based on our budget publication for 2024 after our audit, we did determine that the actual cost per student for our district is $16,538. So when you're receiving $7,000 per student, we do know that we do have to come up with additional funding to get through the year since the state allowance isn't covering it. All right, some additional legislative updates. Like I said, we don't have a lot of concrete information currently. But as I said, there's no change to the formula or inflationary factors, with the minimum being 2%, maximum 3%. Compensatory revenue, that's been a hot topic this year. And basically what's happening is they've changed the way they're calculating the formula for our compensatory revenue. And that is a significant portion of our state aid that we receive. And what they're doing is they've changed the factor to be counting our students that qualify for free and reduced lunches, because obviously we don't have free and reduced lunches. It's all free now. They're switching that to counting students that are considered direct certified, or those are the students that are currently qualifying for county benefits. That's how they're getting their numbers now for counting students with higher needs. So this really, we've seen, has decreased the number of students in our counts that actually qualify and are being included in that funding formula for our compensatory revenue. Another topic that we've heard about is the reduction to special education transportation, and they are establishing a commission related to special education. Again, the cross-subsidy aid will likely be decreased in future years. None of this is great news for us, unfortunately. Student support personnel aid is going to be reduced, library aid, student lunch reimbursement is getting reduced. So there's a lot of things that we're up against, but the one good thing is likely our long-term facility maintenance will be expanded to include roof replacements. So I know we all know how much our roofs cost when it comes time for replacement, and we also are looking at a small section of the middle school roof that needs to be replaced yet, along with the high school will be coming due because the high school is actually over 20 years old now. All right, so taking a look at the budget for our general fund expenses. Again, this is our largest fund, and on the left here, you can see our expenditures with the blue bar being the dominant expense for us, which is our staffing expenses. We do have over 400 staff across our 6 sites. And when reviewing the revenue trend, which is on the right side of the graph, you can see the blue bar on there. That's actually our federal funds. It's a little hard to see, but we did see significant, in my opinion, increases to those funds in the $1 to $3 million amounts over the last few years. And that was all coded, corresponding to our COVID funding. So one thing I just want to reiterate is that in 2022, we received about $2 million in federal COVID funding. Excuse me, that was $1.6 million. In 2023, it was $2 million. 2024 was $1.5 million, and that now has ended. So we, in 2025, did not receive any funding related to the pandemic. So I think what's happening now has just been prolonged with receiving that additional federal funding over the last 3 years. All right, so looking into the future, projecting what we think our revenues and expenditures are going to be is something that we always want to be doing. I did factor in all of these various considerations to try to come up with a solid projection for the next few years. For revenues, I projected approximately a 4% increase each year, with our expenses at about 3% increases for the years going forward. One additional expense that we are seeing that is an employer cost and an employee cost, but it's being split, is the new family medical leave, which is starting here January 1st of 2026, which starts right in the middle of our fiscal year. So for this coming year, I have factored in a rate of 0.44% for the employee portion that will need to be covered. And so that is built into the budget, and assuming going forward that will continue. And then also the TRA contributions increased, which is great, but it also is a cost for the district. So that is going up from 8.75% of a contribution to 9.5%. And when looking at our overall salaries for teachers and staff that qualify for TRA, that's about $160,000 increase per year to get up to that higher percentage that is required. And then our declining enrollment, that's also something that affects our revenue stream. And if you're looking at those 26 students that we're projecting to have less of in the next coming year, and taking that times that general ed funding of just over $7,000, that equates to a loss of revenue of about $195,500. So a few students can have a pretty significant effect on your revenues. All right, so here is the projection of what I'm anticipating our fund balance is going to look like over the next several years. So I have our actual numbers listed there for fiscal year 23 and 24. And then I used our budgeted numbers for 25 and again for 26. And then that gave me the projected fund balances using those projected increases for revenues and increases for expenses. So you can see that in the red there, as soon as 2027, without any additional revenues or funding generation, we're definitely going to run out of funding. Having a fund balance of 3.8% means that we will not cash flow throughout the year. We have a couple big times during the year that we have to make some large payments to the tune of, I know our bond payments come in at about $2 million. We just made one of those, that's twice a year. And then always in June, we have our large payout for the summer pay for our teachers. And I believe last year, I looked that up, it was about 9.1 million in one payroll. So we need to be able to cash flow. And so what I did then is take a look at what our numbers would look like if we were to have an operating referendum go into place. And from Ellers, we work closely with them to determine where we really think we need to start at with an operating referendum. And we're projecting that a $2 million referendum would get us where we need to be. And this is something that will last for 10 years with the potential of renewal. So when looking at our residential homes, they're saying that the average home in Marshall is approximately valued at $225,000, which then with a $2 million operating referendum, their property taxes would go up approximately $26 a month. For commercial properties, I would just point out if a property is valued at $500,000, their property tax would then increase by about $57 a month. For any agriculture or homestead, I know we're a very large agriculture community, so that's always important to our community to find out how those properties are affected. The actual land isn't affected by an operating referendum. What those owners would be paying on is their home, garage, and 1 acre of property. So when projecting out what our revenues and expenses would look like if this referendum were to pass this coming November, we wouldn't see that revenue come in until fiscal year 2027. So this is basically the same projections I had in place based on an addition of $2 million in referendum revenue, which does give us a positive fund balance then, allowing the district to cash flow year after year, especially during, again, those high expenditure months in June and a few other times throughout the year. All right, so I'm going to touch on our smaller fund balances that we do budget for every year. And here you can see our actual numbers through last year, and then our revised budgeted balance, balance budget for 2025, and then what I have projected for our preliminary budgets for both food services and transportation. I will note that the transportation fund, that is not necessarily recognized by the state. Those funds actually are rolled into the general fund through our audit process. So basically what I take is from our Jet End fund, determine what I need in that transportation fund, and those funds are just transferred between the two accounts. So I try to keep that as close to balanced as I possibly can based on our expected expenses for the year. All right, and then looking at our community service fund and our debt service fund here. We did a lot of work this year around accurately coding our teachers and administrative salaries for our community services programs that we have, especially, well, in our early childhood areas. And we want those expenditures, especially for salaries, to be representative of the time that those teachers are actually spending in early childhood. Adult basic education is also run through this fund and is basically an in and an out for us. Whatever expenses there are, we do receive funding for that programming. And then the last major area in community services is all of the activities and programmings that are run through the city of Marshall. So we do remit those revenues for those community programs to the city of Marshall twice a year. And then the debt service fund, that is where we pay all of our bonds for capital projects out of, and Ellers manages that fund for us. So that is where those debt service payments and revenues are sitting for next year. And also related to that debt service fund, I don't have an updated version of this chart through June of this year yet, but this is from the prior year, projecting out what our debt payments are and will be going through the next several years. So you can see in 2028 that there will be a reduction in those debt payments. Again, in 2030, a reduction. So as long as we don't have other capital projects adding to these bond payments, those are a few years that we should see some relief in those bond payments. And then our capital services fund, or our capital outlay, we broke this out between our general capital purchases. So this is anything we buy with a useful life of over a year, is a very simple way of breaking that down, or our long-term facilities maintenance. And as you know, we submit a budget to the state annually in the summer for approval of that long-term facilities plan, and that's over 10 years. And we can receive up to $380 per pupil, but that is prorated based on the age of our buildings. So if we have any buildings that are under 35 years old, that amount is prorated down based on that age. You can also see too, when looking at the expenditures and revenues for LTFM, that there is a lag between the time we spend the money and receive the funds. So they're about a year behind on that LTFM funding. All right, so getting to the overall summary for the budget. You can see here in the top section highlighted in blue, this is our current revised budget to finish out this year. And obviously we did plan to deficit spend this year at just over 1.1 million overall between all funds. And for the section in orange, that is the preliminary budget now for both revenues and expenditures, also listing the fund balances. And so overall, we are projecting a planned budget deficit again for fiscal year 2026 of just over 1.7 million. And then going forward here, to continue breaking those numbers down, you can see the revenues there compared to the expenses in each fund. Typically, we don't want to be spending our reserve balances, but we did host some listening sessions with our MPS staff, and we did receive a significant amount of feedback expressing the desire to spend down those reserve funds, which after last year, we're at about 22%. And so that was planned for this year. And again, we're listening into that feedback, spending down some of those reserve funds. We're anticipating that after these 2 years, we will have spent down at least 10% of that. And we will get to a point where we need to make some changes, whether that be through a referendum or additional cuts, in order to get back on track and in a comfortable place moving forward. Any questions?
Sarah, do you see any cash flow issues for next year?
No, we shouldn't.
I know in the past, like back in 08, 09, we did those aid anticipation certificates where we were able to borrow money. If we needed it, we never used them, but we had that there if we needed it for cash flows.
Okay. Yeah, I know we do have several CDs in place right now. They're pretty short-term with them on a cycle where at least every 1 to 2 months, we're either renewing or holding off. So I do have some flexibility there with about $2 million in CDs that we could just let go and have available if needed. And they're pretty short-term from month to month. CD rates are still decent, so I have been renewing several of them. But I know towards this time of year, we try to open up some of that cash flow to be able to make these big payments in June.
Any other questions for Sarah? Well, thank you.
Okay.
Next item is the consent agenda. I will entertain a motion.
Second?
There's a motion by Sarah Brink and a second by Sarah Runcie to approve the consent agenda. I will call for the vote. And that is approved. Board forum, any reports from the board? Graduation went off without a hitch, right?
It did. That's good.
Oh, it was all good. It's a great weekend for the city of Marshall, so. Hearing none, I will adjourn this meeting to our work session.